Hello and welcome to another E5 podcast. I am Richard Emery and tonight we have Louise Taggart on the virtual sofa, ready to share some interesting facts with you. So good evening, Louise.
Evening, Richard. It's lovely to be on.
Thank you very much. Now, for those of the audience who haven't come into contact with you, can you give us a little bit of a synopsis of who you are and what you do?
Who am I and why am I here? Okay, so I am a former employment lawyer, but I am on your podcast because my brother was killed at work. He was electrocuted at work back in 2005. So a 26-year-old man who left his home, left his fiancée in the morning and didn't get back to her at night. All because of an entirely preventable electrical incident at work. So as a result of what happened to him, I became involved in a sort of campaign group called Families Against Corporate Killers. So their name's a bit in your face, FAC for short. So I joined with the FACers, as we like to call ourselves, and sort of campaigned for better health and safety regimes, campaigned for better justice for families, campaigned for lessons to be learned from the deaths of our loved ones. And that led to me also becoming involved in Scottish Hazards, which is a health and safety charity, which I worked for a while, and I'm now on their board of trustees. But I also, alongside that, I go into organisations and I talk about what happened to Michael. I talk about the failures that led to his death because I don't want it to happen to anybody else.
No, and it's a terrible story. I've listened to it on a number of occasions, and it still bothers me, and it still angers me when I hear people complaining about lock off and tag off. And as part of this, you had some involvement with Super Rod. I'm guessing. I'm frantically looking here. Yeah, Super Rod on the Electricians Community Forum on Facebook in April 2018 when they did an audit of the guys online. I'm not on Facebook, so I didn't see it. It had 825 respondents, and it paints, shall we say, a disappointing picture.
Grim picture, I think. Yeah. Picture.
So for the guys that haven't seen it, it's a A4 flyer. It's easily available if you search for Super Rod, the shocking truth about installer safety, and it gives us a breakdown. And I don't really know where to start on this. I suppose the hit line is the top. 6 people have died every working year, and 250 people have suffered a serious injury. If we then extrapolate that, we've got well over 1,000 near misses where people have come in close contact and may not have gone home.
It's there, the shocking truth. And you look at those 6 coffins that are on the infographic, and behind every one of them's a dad or a fiance or a son. You know, it's not good enough. And the fact that the rate of death continues along the same lines as it was, if not worse than it was when my brother was killed. I'm really having great difficulty in understanding what needs done to get through to people. The importance of lock-off tag-out, the importance of proven dead, the importance of employers providing the right kit for their workers, and those workers then actually using them.
Yeah, so, okay. A couple of questions, so some thoughts for you. Is this a management issue? Is this a training issue? Is this an attitude issue? or is this everything? Is it endemic in our industry?
Yeah.
It's certainly from my generation. I've been in the trade considerably over 30 years now, and up to 2007 I was mostly domestic, and since 2007 I've been all industrial and commercial. Post 2007 I wouldn't see a lock off kit. You would not see a formal voltage indicator. You would have something to prove dead, but insulation tape was the way that you did it.
Yeah.
Just in a domestic environment. Post 2007, a lot more. As soon as you hit the industrial market, it's more controlled, but it's still there. It creeps around the corner. There's still people using tape. When there are better ways of doing it, whether it's easier, whether it's more hassle to go and get the kit, whether the kit's not in your van, whether it's in somebody else's van, everybody should have this. But if we consider that there are 100,000 sparks in the country, electrical workers, to make the figures easier for my little brain, I don't know if that's anywhere near accurate. That means 25,000 sparks rarely or never use a lockout kit.
Yeah.
Based on these figures.
Yeah, and it's a fundamental part of training. It's been a fundamental part of training since the mid-1980s. Since 20 years before Michael died. And yet, when the HSE inspector who was investigating Michael's death was going into electrical wholesalers to ask for examples of the lock-off kits so that he could produce them as evidence at the trial of Michael's employer, he was getting told, "Oh, nah, mate, don't stock them. No demand from industry for them." 20 years after it's been a core part of training.
Yeah, and I would suggest that you're still going to struggle sometimes. I do go into wholesalers. There's one that's doing a lovely little kit with a mega potential indicator and a lock-off kit sat on the trade counter.
Yeah.
There are others where they've got them slung somewhere outside, but they're not in your face.
Right. I think CEF have teamed up with Super Rod to do some sort of offer on the back of this survey.
Other electrical wholesalers are available, but that's the one that I saw. And the viewers won't know, but Louise, myself, and Paul Meanham sit on the electrical safety roundtable for workplace safety, and this is one of our current bones of contention, just to try and get some more visibility and profile about what's going on. We're not there yet, but it will come out at some point. But to carry on with this survey, it would suggest, as I've alluded to, that you're far more likely to come across lock-off kits and a suitable way of locking off in an industrial environment. Now, whether that's because it's better controlled, whether there's a better level of competency, whether they're made to do it. But if 30% of domestic installers are locking off and 70% of industrial installers are, it would suggest that there is something there that makes people do it. Maybe it's the complex systems. Maybe it's
I think more robust, safe systems of work being in place. That a risk assessment and a method statement is produced, and that you're more likely to have somebody overseeing the work. It's not. I don't know, in the domestic installation sphere, I guess there's more sort of lone wolves out there who work for themselves.
There might be, but more one-man bands. I did a little straw poll on my WhatsApp group. Let's see what that is at the moment. So on the small amount that I've grabbed, it's got 93% of people say they use a lock-off kit and they have one, and 7% say they don't.
Oh wow!
And 81% of people say that they have a working voltage indicator, and 19% say they don't.
Right.
That's just quite good, but I'd kind of like to see a bit more on this.
They say they've got a voltage. They say they've got a lock-off kit, but do they? How many say that they
Do they
use it
use
every
it?
time?
Yeah, yeah. How many get it out of the van?
Yeah,
And
it's that too much
whether,
hassle thing. It's like, well, how much hassle is it going to be for your partner or your
yeah,
mum and dad to have to arrange your funeral?
yeah. And I'm not saying I haven't had electric shocks, and I'm bloody lucky. I've had some nasty ones, certainly in the 90s. I had a couple of really close misses,
Right.
and it was too easy to get on. Accidents happen. We weren't working live; we were working near to live conductors, and it's easy. It's easy to just push on and get on with it. As I say, we never had lock-off kits. I don't know. I don't remember any of the Sparks that I was working with at the time having them.
Yeah,
The
and that's
80s and 90s.
I've had that recently from somebody who worked for my brother's employer at the time has sort of commented on a post recently and said, it wasn't common practice back then
Mm,
to have lock-off kits anywhere apart from kind of offshore. I said,
yeah,
well, it's not good enough, I'm afraid, because it should have been common
yeah,
practice because it was a key part of the electrical contracting industry. You should have had the lock-off kits on your sites. So just to point at everyone else and say, well, they weren't doing it, so why should
no,
we? Really?
no. It is something I bang on a lot about now, and people get fed up with it. But within my role, I go around and audit people and
Hmm.
make sure they are using the appropriate kit. They have the appropriate kit, and when they get it out of the van, it actually looks as though it's been used.
Used.
I
Yeah.
don't. I don't want to see a pristine, clean lock-off kit. Uh,
No.
I'd rather they put some other bits in with it. But I'm in a far more commercial environment where the controls, the safe systems of work are there.
Hmm.
There are still people getting away with bits and pieces. On the other side, once you've locked it off, it would look like 1 in 10 people don't use a voltage indicator. So
Yeah.
that's 10,000 sparks.
Mm. Yeah, if we go on your 100,000, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
If,
Yeah, so it's whether they're using their multimeters, which is what the only thing my brother had available to him. And that's the HSE inspector said, it's too easy to have that set to your
yeah,
wrong selection and you get a false zero
yeah.
reading. Um, so yeah, that's what he'd been given by his employer, despite the
It's
fact that their risk assessment and method statement said it should be checked by a proven voltage
yeah,
indicator.
yeah.
So
And they,
again, this is about whether individuals have their voltage testers and use their voltage testers, but actually, how many use a proven voltage tester? So how
mm,
many are actually, proven it's working, then testing,
prove.
and then proven again? That
Yeah, there,
again is a mystery to me.
there are statements about what voltage potential voltage indicators are and what electrical meters are, and why one isn't as appropriate for the job as others.
Yeah.
Um,
I was in Australia recently and they looked at me like I had horns growing out my head when I was speaking about voltage indicators because they just use multimeters as a matter of
mm,
course.
yeah,
So in some ways we are more ahead than other countries, but we're not the pinnacle of where we should be.
no,
Not by any manner. I
and
mean,
they've got other protection policies in place, like licenses to practice and whatnot.
mm,
Um, so if we work down the list, 33% of electricians who don't use a voltage tester think they're experienced enough not to make a mistake. So that's three and a half thousand people working in the industry that won't make a mistake.
yeah, well, the HSE electrical inspector who investigated Michael's death said that, I've done it myself with a multimeter
Mm,
and I've done it more than once. And
mm,
he had decades of experience
mm,
in the electrical industry and was now the HSE's kind of principal electrical inspector. So he's saying
yeah,
he can do it, he can make that mistake. Anybody can make that mistake.
we are unfortunately fallible. We
That's it.
will make
Yeah,
mistakes,
yeah.
and
You're tired, you're distracted, then
yeah,
yeah.
working shifts, pulling double shifts, working long nights. Did shop fitting in the 90s, and the hours were hideous. It relied on one guy to shut everything off. and disconnect everything. And there was never any lock-offs on that.
Right. Yeah. No.
And you know, we were 74-hour refits, 72-hour refits in shops.
Okay.
In and out. Yeah. But it's not right, and we know that now. And we live and we try and push things forward to make things better for people in the future.
Absolutely.
We got another one. 8% of installers who don't check for voltage think that a voltage tester is too much hassle.
Yeah, it's like, are those the ones who use the back of their hand, that lick the back of their hand?
Lick the back of the hand and put it on quick.
Yeah, my mind boggles. It really does. I mean, the sheriff, the sort of judge who presided over the trial of Michael's employer, she said when she was sentencing his employer that she believed that there was a male macho cavalier approach being adopted in the industry at the time. And we're now, the trial was in 2008. So we're 11 and a half years on from that. That male macho cavalier approach is still being adopted in the electrical contracting industry.
I think, unfortunately, it is. Another statistic that's been picked up: 25% of those who don't regularly use a voltage tester say that theirs is broken or needs new batteries. So, what's that? 2,500 sparks have got a broken tester in their van.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't like putting my fingers near anything that could be live. In certain environments, it's easier to say that you're happy that you've isolated everything. If you're pulling the main DNO fuses in a house, you've got one fuse and everything's dead.
Yeah.
But you've got solar PV now. You've got electric vehicle charging points. You've got so many other ways that you can induce a problem into your installation.
Yeah.
That just brings a bit of a worry. But people can make a risk assessment and use common sense as to their control of their work area. But for me, your first stop to proving safety is lock it off and prove it dead. And
yeah, absolutely.
You know,
I've had people do it in my own flat. So yeah, I had people in my flat who they'd done a full rewire. They'd been organised by the landlord, and they had to come back to replace an electric fan in the bathroom. So I'd explained to them when they were doing the rewire that I was really anxious about what they were doing and why I was anxious about what they were doing. I just told them, please do everything by the book. And when they came back to do the electric fan, the boss is missing, but it's the sort of senior guy and the apprentice who are there. When they come in, I asked them if they're isolating the circuit or they're isolating the board, and I got told we're isolating the circuit. I get my boys ready for school, go to leave the house, and there they are, up. The fan's now in their hand. One of them's up the ladder, fan's in his hand. And I'm like, he's not been near that board. So I said, sorry, you told me you were isolating the circuit. And he told me that it's all right, hen, because the switch outside the bathroom is what powers this, and it's off. Right. The switch outside the bathroom that my, at the time, 3.5-year-old, maybe 4-year-old, had thought it a cracking laugh to turn on when somebody was in the bathroom because the extractor fan was making a racket. So, that kind of, the common sense about your work environment was not there in that situation. It is that who else is in the house? Who's going to get fed up that something's been turned off? Just lock it off, and then they can't turn it back on.
And they get everywhere. The amount of times I had a hammer disappear because little Johnny came in to collect it and was smashing his toy up in the other room.
I'm sure Connor would have made merry with that. Yeah.
They move so quickly, and before you know it, if they can get it, and especially if they've seen you tinkering around with stuff, they're straight away in there. Is it a boy thing? I think it is.
Well, and I wonder if it's a boy thing in this kind of electrical industry as well, I have to say. Yeah, I wonder if there were more females in the industry, whether things might change for the better.
It has to be said, I did grizzle a little bit late last year about the lack of female sparks.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing far more female apprentices, late starters converting over. I did a workshop for somewhere, can't remember where it was, and there were two there.
Right.
Two young girls were doing it. So they are starting to creep in. I pity them because it's a thankless place to be. But maybe a few more in there will shake things up. And I want to see some of the women that want to start later doing it.
Okay.
And a lot of people malign the short courses, but I don't know what your options are if you're late coming into the industry. Male or female, doesn't make any difference. How are you going to get into the industry and learn if you haven't got a short course option? Because you're not going to get an apprenticeship.
Right. Okay.
But I've heard of some of the girls, they've done it and they understand and they've come out and they know this is the beginning of their road and they've got to do more. It's the same with the blokes. If you go and do it and you're prepared to be mentored and carry on beating the drum and learn what you need to learn, then I don't see there's a lot of option if you want to come in late. I started when I was 17, but if you're, I don't know, much above 22, 23, I don't know how you get on an apprenticeship in the normal route. Anyway, we digress. Why don't installers regularly use a lockout kit? I don't know whether this was thrown in as a bit of a joke. 31%. I work alone. Okay, well, I used to do quite a lot of EICRs, working in houses, empty houses. And how easy is it after a long shift, busy, racing to get home, to be flicking circuits back on as you're trying to get other stuff working and flick the wrong one on?
Yeah.
I suppose the argument is you could do it if it was locked off, but you would have to unlock it and you'd have to think more about what you were doing to do that.
Yeah.
16%, I talk to other trades on site and let them know what I'm doing. Good. Communication is great, but how many sites have I worked on where the painters want the lights back on?
Yeah, so they just turn it on.
Yeah. 10%, I'm not provided with one by my employer. Well, that's just criminal.
Yeah.
It is criminal. You should be provided.
And that was the case for my brother's employer's case. They didn't provide lock-off kits to their guys. There was the use of the insulating tape or the isolating tape on site. That's how lock-off was done. There was an attempt made at an argument that because the office door was locked, where the distribution boards were, that was safe isolation, and I was just laughed at by the HSE. So
10% is too much hassle. I get that, I suppose. You've lugged all your stuff out, you haven't got it in your bag. Stick a bit of tape on it, tape falls off, painter walks in, turns you back on halfway through a job. It's a good way of ruining your day and potentially a load of other people's as well.
Yeah.
I did work for a company a little while ago, and they managed to electrocute an apprentice, and I think it took him 12 months to lose his arm.
Oh.
Got carbonisation up the blood vessels.
Oh.
And that was a 5 amp circuit.
It's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And this is it, like this whole it's too much hassle. It should just be part of your job.
I don't know. 10%, I'm only going to be a minute or two with the power isolated. Well, the power wasn't isolated. You'd only turned it off.
Yeah.
9%, they're too expensive. If it's your company's responsibility to buy them, then it's not expensive for you at all.
No.
Um,
And if you're working for yourself, again, it should be a key part of the costs that you've factored into running your business.
Here you look on eBay, 25, 35 quid, you can get an Ideal or a Q-Tech starter pack. You build it up over the time goes on. I don't need to use it as I have an alternative way of working on. Hang on, I don't need it as I use an alternative way of marking the cables I'm working on. 9% don't even know that. Know what they're talking about. They're an alternative way of marking the cables. Don't understand that one. Do you know how these questions, were they open questions?
I'm not sure, if I'm being honest.
Because some of these answers are a bit too random to be.
Yeah.
To have 9% of, or so probably about 80 people say that they had an alternative way of marking cables. I don't understand how that's.
I think out to the side there's a kind of alternatives to lockout kit.
Right.
By installers, so maybe that
we'll hit that in a minute.
That further.
4% can't find them in my local wholesaler. Every possibility you can't, but bit of planning goes a long way, and it should be there before you get to that point. As you say, alternatives to lockout kit used by installers. 44% signage. Well, that's part of the isolation. Lockout, tag out, caution sign, mark it up. On very few occasions, you'll come across a device that you can't put an isolation on with a lock. Very few. Then you need to plan how you're going to create a safe work zone around that. Not easy. I have come across it. 2% do nothing, so they don't have an alternative to a lockout kit. 2% disconnect the cables from the distribution board. 19% use the isolation tape.
Hurrah!
Comes back again. 2% use verbal warning, and 1% lock the switch room or electrical cupboard. Maybe that's Michael's job.
Which failed in Michael's case.
The problem is with a lot of risers and cupboards, they have multiple keys. People all over the place will have access to that, and you won't even know who they are.
No.
So,
and the fact was, in Michael's case, it was kind of a last minute, all hands on deck job to get a sports store ready for opening, or ready for handover at least to the client by the next day. So the room wasn't locked because everybody needed access to it.
In and out.
Yeah.
In and out.
Yeah.
And the last one I've got here, 1 in 5 installers don't carry a lockout kit in their van or tool bag. We do see some people on social media. There's quite a lot of these tool bag reviews recently.
Okay.
And I get the guys that are doing first fix work and they don't need that in their kit. But they kind of don't make that statement when they're on the videos on YouTube.
Don't make that clear.
And this is, if this is your first fix kit and you're putting that out as a general instruction to the world, then my disclaimer would be, I don't use this kit on a live installation where I've got to make dead.
Right. Okay.
Or this is my tool bag, my lock-off kit's in the van. We'll do another video on that. And I know I've heard there are a couple of fairly big YouTubers that do keep that as a separate item. But I'd like to know it's a separate item rather than being picked up in the comments.
Okay.
You know, these guys, they've got a high turnover of followers. Some of them may well not read the comments and know it's there.
No.
And you can't control who's looking at that. But they've got to use their common sense in how they portray this, and how they want to address that. So we've kind of dusted the isolation survey down a little bit.
Yeah.
Not everybody does it. Maybe 75 to 80% of people do. They apply it appropriately, correctly, all the time. We may see a few more, maybe quite a lot more, that do it ad hoc when they need to. We may see a few that are using common sense and they are following their risks and method statements and applying the correct process at the correct time. And then we've got these guys here who, for one reason or another, training, aptitude, attitude, or management, are not doing what they need to do to go home safe.
Yeah, there's the peer pressure, there's the complacency, there's the we've always done it this way around here, pal. Like, we're not doing it that way. Don't care what you were taught at college. We've always done it this way around here. Yeah, there's all of that going on.
And how many people are dying over a 5-year period, according to the HSE?
About 30.
There's 30 people in a 5-year period. And I think that goes up when you look at the SQCR figures as well, because there's about 12 people a year if you combine the two together.
Okay.
Which is more DNO, and it's more around people hitting mains, not checking before they dig, drilling through things. But there are also other elements, of course, the mechanical. You said earlier on the mechanical fatalities, the entrapments that are also bound up around isolations. And I know myself and Paul Skirm are going to try and get together and do a head-to-head electrical versus mechanical on the potential risks of stored energy, hydraulic gravity, that can catch an electrician out when he's working on machinery.
No, that'd be great.
Between the two sets, there's quite a lot, but I think we kind of need to leave the isolation bit behind and hear Michael's story to drive home a little bit harder why people need to think long and hard about how they isolate things, if you can.
Okay. So Michael was, I think I said earlier, he was only 26. He was engaged. He was actually, the morning that he left for work that afternoon, they were getting a puppy. Him and his fiance were getting a wee puppy. Sort of setting up home together, looking forward to their life together. And he had travelled into Edinburgh for a job. He then got called up to Dundee for this all hands on deck job to get a JJB sports store and gym complex ready for a handover to their client. So, as I said, that's by the next again morning, or else their penalty clauses were going to kick in. So he goes up to that job. They do bits of work. They're then sort of time for their evening tea break, because it's likely that they're going to have to work through the night. So they have their evening tea break, they have their game of cards in the cabin, they have their chippy, and head back to work. And he only went back to work for another 40 minutes before he suffered a fatal electric shock. So that came about because him and his colleague were set to work to install a security system, and they were needing to connect a cable that was already in place within the ceiling void to one that they'd pulled in themselves. So Michael cut that cable, he threw it down to his colleague, and it had insulating tape wrapped around it. And written on that insulating tape were the words "not in use." And as his colleague, as he stood up with this cable, with this tape round it, he kind of looked up and he saw the false ceiling just rise an inch or so, inch or two, and Jim shouting up, "Mikey, you're leaning on that wire," the wire that was holding the suspended ceiling up. And Jim watches as that ceiling then rises even further, and then the whole ceiling collapsed, and Michael landed at Jim's feet. Because, yeah, Michael was being electrocuted when that ceiling rose. So he suffered a fatal electric shock. He suffered a heart attack. No defib on site. CPR was performed. When the paramedics arrived, they did get a faint heartbeat back, but he was pronounced dead when he got to hospital. So yeah, so that all, it's kind of 3.5 years, well, just over 3 years then, until we kind of get answers, or part answers, to how that came about, because that's how long it took to get it to court. So we find out at court that, yeah, the lock-off kits that were referred to in the RAMs, they weren't provided by the employer. The voltage testers that were referred to in the RAMs, they weren't provided by the employer. We hear from the supervisor that he didn't regard it as part of his job to ensure that safe working practices were adhered to at all times. When I and others feel it was a fundamentally important part of his role. So yeah, all these things accumulate, and my wee brother's dead. And even now, I mean, we're never ever going to get full answers as to why he's dead, because we don't know what he did. We don't know what tests he carried out. Only Michael knows what tests he carried out. So he may have tested when the circuit breaker was off, but because it's not safely isolated, someone's turned it on while he's working on it. Or I said earlier, he only had a multimeter. So yeah, he could have had that set to the wrong selection and he gets the false 0 reading. But there was also a possibility that he used the cheeky wee shortcut that cut through all of the bits of the cable at the same time, and if it goes bang, then we know it's live. But it didn't go bang, because he stripped the insulating material from the cable, and he's had his thumb on the metal part of his snips when he's been doing that, and he's leaning on a suspended ceiling wire, and he's standing on steps that are metal steps. So yeah, the shock either goes from one of his hands to the other one, or from his hands to his feet and his legs. And that's how the heart attack happened. So yeah, so that's how it all came about, and it's a series of failures, fundamental failures in implementing safe systems of work that were there on paper, but they weren't being put into practice. It was a tick box exercise, health and safety on this site. So yeah, so we're left. His employer was found guilty. They were fined £300,000. But you know what's that like?
Doesn't replace what you've lost, does it?
No, it's not. It's not any sort of justice for what happened.
It's an emotional thing, and unfortunately, I live it every time with you. As I say, we've done a few bits and pieces together, and it's heartbreaking. It really is, and I don't. You can't go back and help anybody, and I dearly would if I could, but this is my way of trying to assist and try and inform and help.
And it's brilliant that you guys are kind of driving this, because there's been a fundamental failure on the part of the likes of Select and NIC, EIC, and others that fall into that band. I feel to take this and deal with this. I would so like to see proactive, unannounced inspections by these bodies of their
Mm,
members to see if their members are following the correct safe systems of work.
mm.
But there is no appetite to do that. Of course, there's no appetite to do that. You do it, you lose members.
No, no. And the other problem that I've got is if you are unfortunate, and you would have to be really unfortunate to get kicked out of one of these voluntary schemes, that you just can move to the next one.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk about blacklisting, but there's no way of scoring your behaviour. If you were a habitual car crasher and you kept on writing cars off, you would be put off the road eventually because your insurance would just cost so much that you wouldn't be able to be insured.
Yeah.
But it just seems that there's no way of registering a black mark against your name to say that you weren't competent. And I get that. I get the bit about mentoring and training, and you're better off to have them in the fold and working with people to inspect and better your standard of workmanship. But I don't see it happening.
No, neither do I. Neither do I. And yeah, despite attempts to sort of engage with, in particular, Select, I don't see the appetite there to do
Mm.
it. So the likes of you guys doing what you do, trade union health and safety reps doing what they do, hazards campaigners.
Mm.
It's down to all of us, I think, to buck the trend and improve the standards to where they need to be.
Try and get some of the guys to lift their levels up a bit and be better tomorrow than they were today.
Yeah.
And just ask the questions and push back a little bit and go home.
Absolutely. Go
See your
home
family.
safe. Yep.
Yeah, I speak to a few. I don't speak to many. I won't say I have the catchment group that some of these guys have, but I'll always support any of my contacts that ask, and that's all we can do, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you for that, Louise. I've ruined your evening.
You have. Thanks, Richard.
You'll have to go and have a strong sherry now before bed.
A wee Jack Daniels or something, yeah.
Jack Daniels and Coke. Oh, don't start me. I'm on dry January.
Oh, are you okay?
Oh, heavens. That's a terrible thing. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, Louise.
You're welcome.
Hopefully we'll meet up again soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.